Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really delighted to be here with my friend and co-lead of the Belarus caucus in the Senate, Roger Wicker. And we are both so happy to welcome the head of the Belarus opposition group, Svetlana Tikhonovskaya, and delighted to have her here today to talk about the challenges that the opposition and the people of Belarus are facing. I'm particularly pleased to have Svetlana here because I think she is such a courageous and inspiring leader, and not just for Belarus, but for the people of the world and for the women of the world. And I want to thank all of those in the Free Belarus caucus who are not able to be here because there's so much going on today, but who are here in spirit. And in fact, it was Svetlana who inspired us to launch this caucus 2 years ago now. So it has been important in reminding the rest of the world what's happening in Belarus when so much of the focus has been on Ukraine. What Viktor Lukashenko is doing in Belarus, his autocratic government that operates with impunity and refuses to be held accountable to the citizens it's supposed to serve. It's important to make sure we keep those messages in front of the people of the United States and the free world. Lukashenko has allowed Belarus's sovereign territory to be used to further Putin's expansionist agenda and to facilitate its unprovoked attacks on Ukraine. And it's important to remember that there are brave Belarusians, independent journalists, human rights defenders, and other members of civil society who are bravely fighting in exile to expose Lukashenko's criminal complicity in Russia's war in Ukraine. And the pro-democracy movement needs and deserves support from the West and from the United States. Svetlana represents the future that the people of Belarus deserve. I have deep admiration for her and for this cause, which I know is very personal. Her husband is one of the many political prisoners who are under Lukashenko's regime. My thoughts are with him and with all of those who are being unjustly detained in Belarus right now, including Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty journalist Ihor Losik, whose picture is right there. He's now spent 1,000 days in prison, and he's reported to have recently attempted suicide. So again, I condemn, and I know the caucus condemns in the fullest terms, Lukashenko's brutality against journalists, against activists, against anyone who disagrees with his dictatorial regime. The people of Belarus deserve better. They deserve a leader who chooses freedom, democracy, and humanity. And we are proud to host Ms. Tikhonovskaya today at the U.S. Capitol to stand with her and with all of those who are calling for a democratic future in Belarus, especially as we mark Belarus Freedom Day this coming weekend. So thank you all again for being here, and let me turn over the podium to my co-chair, Senator Wicker.
Thank you very much, Senator Shaheen, and it is a pleasure to be here today and an honor to stand here with this distinguished representative of all the freedom fighters in Belarus, and to say that our caucus, our bipartisan caucus, stands with her and her countrymen in believing that there's a better future, a future for Belarus that includes representative democracy, that includes freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and those fundamental freedoms that we hold so dear. I also want to thank Senator Shaheen for taking the lead in this caucus. And we discussed it for some time, but it did seem that a couple of years ago was the right time to follow through on that idea and to call it the Free Belarus Caucus, because we want everyone to understand whose side we stand with in this effort. It is alarming, disturbing, and disgusting to see what President Lukashenko is doing and has done to his country. The disregard for an election, overturning of election results, the complicity with Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Putin's illegal war criminal action against the people of sovereign Ukraine. We honor the Ukrainians that are fighting today, and we honor the bravery of Belarusian partisans who are friends of Ms. Tsikhanouskaya and who are doing their part as partisans and people willing to risk it all in Belarus for that day when we can celebrate a true Freedom Day. And as someone who grew up looking at international relations during the Cold War, during the time when the Iron Curtain of communism descended across almost all of Eastern Europe, I can say there is reason for hope. I wondered as a college student, as a teenager, if Poland would ever be free, if Czechoslovakia would ever be a free Czech Republic and Slovakia, and really doubted if it would ever happen in my lifetime, and it did. The Iron Curtain came down, the wall fell, and some of our friends were able to make progress earlier than others. But the fact that freedom and democracy have in history always prevailed over time and have continuously advanced gives me great hope. And so on March 25th, we will be observing, we'll be sending out messages and tweets, and however we can do that. No government can long prosper that tramples on the rights of its citizens. And so we stand here today thanking Svetlana for the suggestions that she's made to us, for some proposals that we are going to take back to our colleagues about real changes in the votes that we have and in the provisions that we enact. And so, Madam President, I'm honored to be here with you and to take your part and to say we are so impressed and so honored by your sacrifice and by your courage. And if you would make some remarks.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to meet again with Senator Shaheen and Senator Wicker, founders and co-chairs of the Free Belarus Caucus. I'm deeply grateful for your support of democracy in Belarus, and especially grateful for such very symbolic but very important acts like today. We have Wicker is one of the stories, but we have thousands of such stories of people who are now imprisoned, and hundreds of thousands of such stories of people who had to flee Belarus because of repressions. I came to the USA to remind that Belarusians now are dealing with dual crises: political terror unleashed by illegitimate dictator and threat to our nation. Lukashenko's repressions are raging, and he does everything Putin wants. Against the will of people, he enabled the war against Ukraine and must bear the full responsibility for this. Russia now denies the fundamental right of Belarus and Ukraine to choose their own future. We support Ukrainians, and I join the calls for more military aid for Ukraine. Only free Belarus and free Ukraine can ensure regional peace and security. We all realize that attacking our state is not final destination of Kremlin. It is a step towards dismantling the transatlantic partnership. The resolution of the Belarus crisis cannot be postponed for later. The regime's criminal behavior has global implications, since what happens in Belarus doesn't stay in Belarus only anymore. Undoubtedly, a democratic and sovereign Belarus is in the interest of all. Only Belarusians can implement the change in their own nation, but we need your help. I firmly believe that Belarus must be part of the regional strategy to bring peace and stability. It is time to push back against Russia's interference into internal affairs of Belarus. It supports the illegitimate regime and conducts colonialist actions against our sovereignty and national identity. The aggressor military freely uses our territory, airspace and infrastructure to attack and threaten Ukraine. The Russian military should be fully withdrawn from Belarus, and our country must stop participation in the war. Belarus cannot stay in close relations with the aggressor and will leave the Union State Treaty and military alliance with Russia. I also support the call for the appointment of the US Special Envoy on Belarus. This complicated context would benefit from such an appointment, ensuring a new level of coordination among friends of Belarus. And finally, I hope that new version of the Belarus Democracy Act will be initiated to reflect the regime's role in the war. The Belarus caucuses in the Senate and the House could become the champions of this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from reporters? Any of us? Yes.
Hi,
If
Christina
you could
Mothan.
identify
Christina
yourself.
Mothan, National Journal. I'm curious, much of the Belarusian opposition is either imprisoned or in exile. What can the international community do or provide to the opposition in order to strengthen your ability to operate within the country and weaken the Lukashenko regime?
So first of all, we ask our partners to stick to this two-sided approach, to create multiple points on Lukashenko's regime through sanctions, through political isolation, and give more assistance to civil society, to our democratic forces, to political groups, to our cultural initiatives. Just we have to weaken the regime and to strengthen people, and only this combination will bring us to changes in our country. We have to exhaust this regime. The regime is rather weak at the moment, despite maybe they might seem monolithic, but they are not. They feel overstressed. Lukashenko understand that he's unshakable, that he lost all the support of democratic world, and instead democratic world supports our movement, and we are grateful for this. Also, it's very important to avoid impunity for Lukashenko. You know, he has to bear the full responsibility for crimes against humanity in Belarus and for war crimes. And now his role in this war is overlooked, and it unties his hands. You know, he doesn't feel like a strong position on this issue, and he can commit any crimes, without any attention. So we ask the world to use all the possible mechanisms like international courts, ICC, ICJ, to speak up about his crimes and to to call him co-aggressor, call him accomplice, in this war. And just thank you.
Let me just add, one of the things that I think at a very basic level that the caucus is trying to do is to continue to raise the issue of Belarus, to make sure that people don't forget, as so much of the focus has been on the war in Ukraine, on what China's doing in the Indo-Pacific, to make sure that people remember that Belarus is also a place where we've got to continue to promote democracy. And as we're going through the appropriations process now, to take a look at all of those programs that have been there to try and help the pro-democracy movement in the country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I certainly